Ken is a former FBI agent and certified fraud examiner. His company conducts background investigations on management teams, fund managers, executive hires, business partners, and vendors to provide investors and other stakeholders with a complete picture of any potential investment, allowing them to transact in confidence. His clients include pension funds, fund of funds, family offices, private equity firms, and other investors. He is also the author, or co-author, I should say, of Digging Disclosure, Tactics for Protecting Your Firm's Assets from Swindlers, Scammers, and Imposters. But before I introduce Ken, I would like to acknowledge and thank our sponsors, without whose support none of this is possible, and you can see up on the screen who we are. So Ken, without any further ado, how are you today? Great to have you on board.
Thanks very much.
Why don't we dig right into it then? A little overview of the firm. Do you want to spend a moment in very general terms, just talking a little bit, maybe in greater depth, about what it is you do?
You did a pretty good job, but I founded the firm Corporate Resolutions, Inc. in 1991. We're based here in New York City. We're a boutique firm. We have 30 people. As Bob said, we work with over 250 private equity firms, as well as pension funds, fund of funds, hedge funds, and family offices to conduct fund manager back checks, to essentially to confirm that they are who they say they are. We do the same also for vetting C-suite hires and board members as well. And the other part of us is we also address allegations of fraud and misconduct at companies.
Very nice. So, look, in the title of this presentation, we talk about building trust with due diligence. Building trust with due diligence. So what does that mean exactly?
Well, the focus of what we do is people risk. People are the biggest risk in any deal. Arguably, management's the key asset you're investing in. And every day, we uncover issues that clients don't want to hear. Fraud and discrimination to sexual harassment and traumatic lawsuits. So the question is, are they really who they say they are, the people that you're looking to invest in? Because if you think about it, often you know about them what they tell you, what their resume reflects, what the LinkedIn profile says. And often in our business, we find that it's not what they tell you, but what they don't that's really important, because sometimes they only tell you the good things, and it's kind of caveat emptor for you. So background checks are all about honesty and trust, and essentially our objective is to decide if you can trust them. Do you know about them to know if you can trust them? You know, essentially, if there's a problem, will they tell you? So background checks serve as a tool to build trust as well as uncover and manage risk. Track record, knowing that we in our business past history is indicative of future performance. If they do at their last 3 or 4 jobs going back 10 or 15 years, that's a good sign they'll do well going forward. But you need to do all that checking. If there were problems, if they got fired, there were lawsuits by former employers, as we say in business, that may be a clue as well. But on top of that, I think this way to assess trust, and this is based on my 40 years experience of vetting executives, is you need to ask, there's one key question, you need to ask a CEO or a fund before you invest, a potential board member, senior hire, or even a potential borrower. The question is simple. Is there anything I need to know? That's the way to build trust. It's a trick question, actually simple, yet direct. And it's designed to quickly gauge trust. Ideally early on, so you don't spend too much money in the due diligence process. But it's kind of drawing a line in the sand. And you need to know whether you can trust them. I'll bet there's a lot of people on the line who ask that question. And I'm going to go into a little more of what happens if you don't ask the question. But in this day and age, you have to ask that question up front, because if you don't, it can just cause a lot of aggravation later on. And if you think about it, How often do you hear a bad pitch? How does someone come forward to say, oh, by the way, I'm under investigation by the SEC, or I was just sued for sexual harassment? Probably not too often, because everyone puffs on resume, pitches, etc., kind of putting their best foot forward. Yet that according to Career Builder, with 58% of people lie in their resume. So this question kind of levels the playing field. After you ask the question, you need to check to verify what they're saying. You know, it's kind of like fashion in a way. You know, you say anything you want, it's got some baggage, but you're to put it out on the table in the beginning, and then it comes more of a confirmation check. So they can say, yeah, because often there's two sides to every story. You want to hear it up front. So if there's a couple things, and then you confirm that with the background check, well, that's good. Probably a great indicator that if there's a problem down the road, they come to you. Well, I told you there's nothing, and the background check uncovers some other things. Well, at least you know you can't trust them. But sometimes you still may want to work with them. So if you think about it, as people prep for jobs, they prepare for the questions. They get professional help on their resumes. And we hear, I read his resume, instead I got John. So ask this question, it'll help you.
That took me a second to get that. I like that, yeah.
It happens. So if you ask them the question right up front, they can't prepare for it other than tell you the truth. So, you know, one of the things I do is I get calls from clients all the time. They, geez, Ken, I'm hoping you maybe can help me. My little Jimmy or Susie, they graduated from Bucknell or whatever, and they got a little trouble, and I went to the expense of getting the record expunged. Now they're going to Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs, and they want to say, I've been arrested or convicted of a crime. What should I say? And I would just tell the truth. You know, because if you don't tell the truth and they find it, they're not going to you because you lied. It's candor. It's all that. You know, I don't care if what it was. Underage drinking, it could have been a DWI. I'm sure you can explain that in a resume. But if you say no and they find it, and even just because the record's sealed, matter of fact, there's an article in the Times today about records being available. If you put it down, they're not going to hire you because you flunked the integrity test.
Yeah. So truthfulness is always important, and obviously this is a timeless topic, and I want to call the audience's attention to the following. At the bottom of your screen, because I know we'll have questions, you have the ability to send questions in through chat. So you can send them to me. You can send them directly to Ken. That's the first thing I just want to remind everyone of. The second thing is I know Ken has agreed to take questions as he speaks. So folks, don't be bashful. If Ken says something and you want to react to it or ask a follow-up question on something at that moment, by all means, please use the chat capability, the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. So moving right along. So, and I think you've more or less covered this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. What's the downside if you ask the question? And I guess we're talking about the employer now. So the employer or the investor, right? So if the question is not asked, what is downside? Is there anything I need to know up front?
Well, what happens is when you don't ask the question up front, and then whoever the provider is uncovers some red flags, well, the client goes or the investor goes, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? They get on the phone with the fund manager and say, tell me about this or that. And the manager probably has a very plausible answer to respond to. But then the question is, you know, would she told you up front? How do you know if he or she is responding only because they're asking? And we get a lot of calls with investors when that exactly happens. We find a red flag, and the investor says, well, this is what we said. What do you think? And some responses we typically hear are, you know, they'll say, well, everyone got sued back then. Complicated. I didn't know about that lawsuit. I didn't know relevant. I only pending cases. Or it was long ago. I forgot about it. That's fault. I didn't even consider it because the firm presented it. It was a misdemeanor. I forgot the bankruptcy. I'm just put it behind me. They told me I didn't have to mention it. Or I had a DWI, but that's not a criminal record. That's a motor vehicle infraction. And that's what investors hear all the time. And now all of a sudden they got to say, is he or she telling me the truth? You know, and when you're investing in a hedge fund or investing in a company, it's all about can you trust your partner. You know, and that's the key to success. And you know, we've seen CEOs who are convicted felons. They got out of jail. They came up with a great concept, and they're backed. I think the key is that the investor knows about it up front. You've heard every story in the book. It's not going to surprise you. You just want to know about it so that if your boss or the LPs come to you, you can say, yeah, we know about it. We discussed it. We're comfortable with it. So that really, that's really the most important thing. We've even seen guys involved in sexual harassment, and they get comfortable with it. We had one where they were about to be acquired by a public company, and there was a sexual harassment issue. They boxed the guy in and said that, you know, they took his stock, his warrants, and everything, that if he looked at another woman in the company again, he was automatically fired, and he would forfeit all of those things. So my point is, if you don't ask the question that comes up later, it just takes longer. It's harder because then all of a sudden, you know, someone can, well, maybe really his executive assistant put together his profile, LinkedIn profile, assumed he graduated from college. So if you're up front, it just can save a lot of aggravation. It takes a lot of ambiguity out of it.
Okay, and we all know what happened there. And as you pointed out, you mentioned sexual harassment. The two topics, fraud and sexual harassment, are very much in the headline these days. Are you seeing more firms doing background checks?
I think it all started, Bob, back after Madoff. I think a lot of our fund-to-fund clients and others, they were all trying to reassess the processes they had in place. What worked, what didn't. Would have uncovered Madoff. And so a lot of people did it, and they really bolstered their ODD process. I think the problem is, it's like the bank industry. Banks have short memory. They had a couple different bank failures over the time. And after a while, they get confidence again, and they, you know, trot the budget, and they streamline some expenses. And, you know, it may not be as robust as it was years ago, but I'm betting probably everyone that's online here has some type of process in place when they're screening executives, when they're investing in managers, when they're buying companies or whatever. It's probably either handled through legal, compliance, HR, or you deal with outside consultants to do this. But the real question is it to uncover red flags, or is it check the box exercise to meet regular standards? Because I think you really have to want to look for the warning signs. And nowadays, I think investors need to think more like activists. You have to scrutinize information. Like, for instance,
some red flags, Ken.
Well, if I can be before to that, you know, these are obviously one of the things, but even on a resume, is it a vague resume? Does it show what city they were in? Do they always end in round years? Are there missing years? Frequent relocation. There's a whole lot of things like that. And the one point I just wanted to make is to reassess or evaluate what you're doing. You know, does it include things like social media? Social media is a big part nowadays. To look at pending lawsuits, because oftentimes, even if the case is closed, it's still toxic. Was it involving fraud? Was it a RICO? Was it sexual harassment? Just because the sexual harassment is closed, many times people settle them. It doesn't mean you do it. So I think it's important to do that. It's important to look whether or not it's just online records. How to figure out which jurisdiction to check people on. Verification of degrees. Sometimes people just assume because it's on their LinkedIn profile that they have the degree. We call them
check a degree out, by the way.
Well, there's actually an easy process. It's called the National Student Clearinghouse. It costs a few dollars. You can do it online. And over the years, probably the last 10, 15 years, every university and college has outsourced. The department handles that to this National Student Clearinghouse, and you can get it online. So it's a tremendous benefit. So it's easy to do. So there's no reason why someone shouldn't do that. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, who was it? The CEO of Yahoo, Scott Thompson. He stated what his educational degree was. It was so easy. I think an activist investor, Bill Ackman at Pershing, is the one who uncovered it. And there was a lot of headline risk for them. But even boards now are looking at are there any public record information out there on someone that they should know about? But if you want, there's a couple quick illustrations I'll over just to think. Matter of fact, we did something for a hedge fund not too long ago. They were hiring a 23-year-old entry-level analyst, and they verified the degree. They took the references. In case it happened to be a young woman, she didn't have a criminal arrest, any record. So some people may say, okay, that's adequate. But in this instance, the hedge fund wanted to go further. We found that she had filed for bankruptcy, and yes, it was discharged, and filed in 3 lawsuits which were closed. So depending upon who you are, you may say, well, they're closed lawsuits or bankruptcy was discharged. Is it important? Well, in this instance, like the bankruptcy, what 23-year-old to file for bankruptcy? Well, maybe they paid their own way through school and they got behind, or maybe had a lot of credit card debt, and someone said, well, why don't you file for bankruptcy, get a fresh start going forward. So if it was that reason, you'd say, maybe a conniver. And that's why you need to look at all the information, and the analysis or connected is important. In addition, this woman sued 3 banks. Well, people listening here on the phone even knew to sue someone back when you were 23 years old. The reason she sued the banks was she claimed she didn't know that the banks would charge her a fee for using their ATM machine. Well, you and I know that. So what it really means is it's not what we found, it means what's capable of, or maybe what you can expect from her down the road. Last I'll make on this is, we looked at another manager, and we found the only thing we found on him was with him was that he had a $4,000 lien for non-payment of child support. Our investor said, well, geez, he's making $500,000 a year. What's $1,000? To be more prudent, they said, well, why don't you talk to the manager? So we talked to the manager, and I said, hey, can you tell me about this? What's this $4,000 lien? He goes into things. If it was something else, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So to him, I said, can you take this? He goes, yeah, I'm going through an ugly divorce right now, and we're at a point where we're going through alimony. So my lawyer said, I think it would make sense if you make it look like you're struggling a little bit. So why don't you not pay child support for a while? So I said, oh, so you have the money, but you're just trying to make it look like you don't have money. He goes, you got it. So I said, well, let me ask you, spouse and kids, are they well-to-do or are they starving? He goes, well, actually, it's working. My wife's not doing too well financially, so I think she's going to settle with me, and she's going to accept lower alimony. So I went back to the investor, and I said, this has been. And so he goes, well, geez, if he's going to screw his wife and kids, what's he going to do with us? So, it's not always black and white, but I think it's important to, analyze what you get and kind of connect the dots. And the point I'll make on this is checks are not one size fits all. If you be someone who's going to be in the warehouse or you're going to be a receptionist, that's one level. You can spend $150. If you're be hiring someone in the finance or accounting department, you're going to want to do more, and even more to a senior person, a board member, or whatever. So there are different levels, just so you know that. You have to abide by the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and I'm sure whomever you use is you got to play by the rules. There's certain things you can and can't do when it comes to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, when it looks at reviewing someone's consumer credit, reporting someone's criminal record or bankruptcies or whatever, depending upon what it is. In each state, and we've had a lot of things over the last few years, your HR people probably understand that, but so you need to talk with them on that.
These are very interesting examples you've given, and I guess they really do illustrate why it's important to do background checks. Just out of curiosity, the young lady you described, did she wind up getting the job or not?
Did. They thought they ended up talking to her afterwards, and she gave what I thought was an adequate response. And, after all, it's a business decision. I've seen, as I said before, convicted felons get backed. And then someone else who had one DWI didn't. It all depends upon the appetite of the investor. And so, but it's important to know it up front. That's the point.
So you said before, I think, that 58% of resumes contained inaccuracies. Just out of curiosity, do you have any statistics on the occurrence of fraud?
Yeah, I do, and then I'll get back to some of those red flags later. But there was.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you want to go through more red flags, please do.
Okay, I'll do that. Then I'll get back to the statistics. Kind of interesting. Again, the red flag from my standpoint, and probably from most investors here, is when you uncover discrepancies, controversies, reputational issues, product lawsuits. When some of them would be someone who's living beyond their means. Can they afford that car or take all these vacations? Or maybe only provide limited references. Or, maybe avoid eye contact. They say they don't recall that lawsuit. Say, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with the picture? In some of the problematic lawsuits we find, or now we find a lot of class actions, violate confidentiality agreements, be sued by an investor. I think that's the biggest one, or sued by former employers. We find probably over 50% of what background checks we do, we find some significant relevant findings. They're not fillers. They're just information that's relevant to the client that they need to think about it, to talk to a manager on and go further. And what happens often when we find these red flags, that's when the client talks to the manager, and they come back to us, and they oftentimes ask us to interview the manager as well. We're kind of independent validation. Ask the same questions again, get their responses, and say, okay, how can we confirm what you're telling us? And then prepare a memo that, in the private equity world, they call it, would go in the reps and warranties, but it become part of their file. So that story is basically what they're saying. So you're saying this is what happened, and here's your story. I think it's important that they know about that. And just, I mentioned some examples before, but I'll go through one or two others, just some we have time. We were doing something on a manager, and he said he was the founder of a fund. And so one of the things we did was something called the Wayback Machine. I'm sure everyone here knows, or a lot of people know what the Wayback Machine. It's a way of looking at archived websites. To look at what someone's website 8 years ago said. And 8 years ago, it said he was the co-founder of the fund, not founder. So I went to the investor and said, did you know he's founder? He's the co-founder. He goes, what are you talking about? Well, his business materials say he's the founder. We've been to his office. We've been dealing with him for 9 months. He said he's the founder. So they're, okay, well, see what else is out there. And there were a couple of other things. But the point is, the fund over the last 8 years had great results. He did to say he was the founder. We said, could he was the co-founder, and someone else left. They went for a different strategy. But he said he was the founder. In this instance, though, they backed him anyway. They were content with the example that he gave. Yet another one where, found that the person, this was a CEO of a company, he didn't have the degree, said he didn't have the MBA, found out we were doing a background check, he went to the investor and said, by the way, my website says I have an a bachelor's degree. My LinkedIn profile says I have an MBA, but I really don't, and explained why I didn't have it. So in essence, we actually went with one of us and them to the CEO and got comfortable with the fact he admitted it and why it happened. So I think you can get comfortable with things. The key is to beforehand. And if you do more limited scope inquiry, or just an online record inquiry, it's not going to be there. The point I'll make is, and this is an old hedge fund, but everyone knows it, and I think this kind of drew a line of sand for a lot of ones. It was Bayou. It was, I think 12 years ago. It was
Israel.
Sam Israel. And what's significant about it is, I'm glad you remember it, because the New York Times reporter went to his former employer at Omega Advisors, a guy named Lee Cooperman, and Lee Cooperman said, you're the first person that ever called me to verify the employment and what Sam Israel did here. And he, by the way, he lied about his time here, and he lied about what he did. So that's significant, and that should have been something that was done. We also found 2 former employees sued Bayou for fraud. 2 clients had just initiated lawsuits. The supposed independent accounting firm they had was being formed by the CFO, a guy named Dan Marino. He was a registered agent. There was no independent accounting firm. I think we all know that now. That's not going to happen. But, the director of investments had filed for bankruptcy. And even what's kind of interesting is Sam Israel had the chauffeured limousine, the big house in Greenwich, but actually it was a rental, and it was Ivanka Trump's house. Kind of interesting. I could go on and on, but these are the things that come up important for you to get comfortable with.
Well, Ken, you were talking about Sam Israel, and maybe this is a good way to get back to the topic of fraud, right? And maybe some statistics on fraud. Do you have any that you can share with us?
Sure. Matter of fact, there's a company, Hiscox, Hiscox, and it's an insurance company, and they do an embezzlement study every year, at least for the last 5 or 6 years. So according to the one in 2017, I'll quote about 5 stats here. They said 82% of the embezzlements, this is on the federal embezzlement side, occur in small businesses. Businesses, according to the SBA, are anyone up to 1,500 employees or up to $35 million. And more by employee as opposed to AUM, because you may have a big AUM, but if it's a small number of staff, you may not.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that statistic?
Yeah, 82% of the embezzlements occur at small businesses.
That's a very interesting statistic.
Yeah,
wow.
40% of the embezzlements occur in the accounting and finance department. So you need to check your people in the accounting and finance department more. Matter of fact, the hedge fund in Connecticut just 2 years ago, where the CFO, he was the controller. There 7 years. Over 7 years, he stole $10 million. What he did was he was able to set up the wires and send the wires, and no one checked on him. He ended up doing an account he opened up in Fidelity. You need those checks and balances. And 50% of the investments employed there over 5 years. So it's not just the new employee that comes in the door. In 95% of the investments, they tried to conceal the investment. So it wasn't just a one-time thing. They concealed it. In 10% of them, they did need checks and balances. And in 88% of the investments, they found one of these 5 characteristics. They lived beyond their means, they had financial problems, close association with clients or vendors, divorce, family problems, and wheeler-dealer mentality. And the other was interesting about it, the average age of Esler was 49, and 56% of the time they were women. So in my experience in doing this, because we do fraud investigations at companies, it's often the long-time employee. The person doesn't take vacation. doesn't ask for a raise, works late, comes in on their day off. That's flew back in the old check hiding days. So that's why you need to do these checks. Everyone, employees are your biggest asset. They're your greatest risks. So that's why you need the checks and balances, or employees need boundaries, kind of a visible fence. There's a criminologist out there named a fellow named Kretzy who said, who wrote a book on saying, why do people commit fraud? And they have 3 reasons. They have pressure, sometimes financial pressure. There's no opportunity. There's supervision. There's no back control. So they have the opportunity. They think they can get away with it. And then the third one is realization. They realize the same, well, I'm just borrowing it. I've been here 15 years. I'll stop when I pay the money back. It happens all the time. Under the embezzlement studies, 50% of the companies in this country hire workers internationally, yet only 31% do background checks. Why? Probably reasons, but it takes longer to verify information internationally, and it's also harder to verify their work experience. The problem is these workers know that too, so they have a chance of getting in if they know you're not going to do background checks. Now, the last stat I'll quote is that according to a HR company, up to 75% of outside hires don't work out. That doesn't mean because of fraud, but it means for a variety of reasons. But I think people need to do a better job of interviewing them, assessing them, whether they do psychological profiles or whatever. Do better. That's all.
Yes.
Point.
So very interesting, I guess, and unfortunately telling statistics on fraud and embezzlement. Ken, as you know, our audience are in the asset management business. So I was wondering if you might be able to share some of the best practices that you're seeing within the asset manager industry.
Sure. Well, the thing is kind of what started on. You people, you have to ask them, is there anything I need to know? I think that's almost the most important thing you need to do. And I'm sure most asset managers are going to have computer policies in place so that you always look at someone's computer if for whatever reason you're concerned about them. I think also doing biannual updates on management teams because circumstances change. We know a lot of asset managers, what they want to do is every 2 years do a check on a manager because they not only criminal record, they want to make sure he doesn't have any financial problems. If he or she was divorced, they didn't know about it, they want to know about that. And also, if they formed any new LLCs, that may be a conflict to what they're doing. So that's really important. I think one of the biggest things, this goes for every company, is education. I'm not a cyber guy, but 6% of the breaches that occur at companies happen because of employees opening attachments. It could be a Bloomingdale's coupon, it could be adult content. Educate your people on that. What problems I talk to asset managers all the time is, and who does it? No one ever checks the IT guy. The IT guy or gal has the keys to the kingdom. They can do everything, but no one checks the IT guy. The guy, oftentimes we find he's got an online degree, not a degree, it's an online degree. And you pay enough money, you can get references, professional references, you can get your grades and transcripts and everything. So I think that's important. We've seen situations where an IT guy at a hedge fund was looking over the partner's computer at night so that he can make his own grades. That occurred. We had another one where the IT guy had kiddie porn on his computer. So these things do happen. One that we do, and I presume a lot of firms in our business do, is look for a 4-page release. It kind of goes back to, is there anything I need to know? And in the 4-page release, it asks where they lived over the last 10 or 15 years, depending upon how old they are, what companies they've been involved with. So a disclosure. Everyone's got their own PPM form. But also asks if you've been involved in lawsuits. If so, explain. Criminal record, explain. they didn't know it up front. And a lot of times they do it before they get real serious with companies. I think that makes sense. With asset managers, you want to make sure they really are invested in the fund. Something they want to know is what kind of worth does someone have. Sometimes people do kind of ongoing monitoring. They have a filter. They have a special server that all the emails go through a filter. And if any keywords pop out, it goes to compliance, and they look at it. And I think the best thing is a lot of firms have tip lines. I think tip lines are great. The hotline is only 3% of the people call in, but tip lines get about 23, 24%. I think it does make sense. Sometimes we have some investors, they take out directors, or some people scan all the employees just to see if there's anything obvious that they should know about. Or if anyone who touches the money, they check them as well.
Okay. So, topic of reference checks, okay. Really is available on the internet.
Well, reference checks is that's a pet of mine. So many times people say, why am I going to waste my time getting reference checks? Who's going to give a bad reference? The real question is, if you take the time to talk to someone, you get something valuable out of it. But go back to what you're saying, the internet has a lot of valuable information that, we get the social media. I could talk on it for 10 minutes as well, but there's a lot of information about someone on the internet, but despite that, nothing passes taking the time to talk to someone. Talk to a reference. It's up to say, can you tell me about tones? How long and what's your relationship? And then listen. Listen, and they'll tell you a lot of things about him or her. And they'll tell you, well, we worked on this project, or he's on this firm, and well, who was he working with? Do you know where they are now? And get names of all those people so you really get a good feel for someone. And spend an hour on the phone, and at the end of it, just say, can you give me names of 3 of the people I should talk to? Then you go call those people. But the most important thing is also to document what they say, because after you talk to 4 or 5 references, and whether it's you, it's the HR people, or compliance, or the service, sometimes you find a pattern of all reference checks. Sometimes discrepancies, you say, wait a minute, something's wrong here. But you want to talk to the references. The references are going to tell you good things about people. So you need to that, but you want to hear, is there anything else that you should need to know?
What surprises?
Exactly it. Everyone knows everything. The best thing to do is, if you ask people these questions, about, is there anything I need to know, blame it on compliance, blame it on legal. Just say, we've had problems before, we don't like surprises. That's exactly it.
Sure. So, Ken, you're doing this for 35 years. That's a long time. A lot's happened, I imagine, over the course of that period. What about your business? If there's what trends have you noticed over the last 35 years?
Well,
the world of due diligence.
The internet didn't exist when I started, Bob.
Yeah.
So it's changed dramatically. So much online information is available. Things we had to go to the courthouses in Arizona. Now some of it's available online. The problem is it may go back 7 or 10 years. And if you're looking at someone who's 50, 55 years old, you need to go back further. I think the biggest thing is social media. Matter of fact, it's an important part of background checks. It is something just came out at the end of March, where the State Department issued a notice of request for public comment saying, what want to do is ask anyone who's applying for a visa to come into this country that they have to offer their usernames and their social media profiles so that we can check that before they come into this country. That's huge. That kind of tells you it's a stay. But, and so, department, before they give a visa to someone, they want to know what their social media profile says. That's important. Nowadays, a lot of colleges, they don't know what someone's social media profile is.
I'm sorry, Ken, what does social media profile mean? What exactly is that?
What have in Facebook or Instagram, they want to be able to look at everything you have there, what you're saying. Many times they want your password. There's college, the HR people at school. So you don't know what's out there on people. And so it's become a big part of what we do. And so young people don't think about it. For people who have kids in college, they have to be careful what they're saying. I think Gmail is just kind of reassessing. That was in the paper this morning. You can take things down from your Gmail account. They're going to be going through all this over the next whatever period, so you can get rid of things. But the seed is important because it gives us a view into someone's personal life.
And no doubt about that. But can I just ask you a question on the people entering this country? So, what are privacy? I mean, where is privacy laws in all this?
Well, that's a big problem. In the UK, they're big on their privacy, they call it.
Yep.
And it has a new law that's going to take effect next month called the General Data Protection Regulation. And they're limiting what information you can get on people. And when we're checking out fund managers in the EU, we can't always get everything. If you do a criminal record check on a fund manager in the EU, we can't actually go to the records and get it. We have to send a request to the manager. He has to then go to his police department to get the information, and then they forward it to us. They're being smart in that way, but that's one of the problems with the Internet, too. They have something called the right to be forgotten, where after a certain time period, if you put a request to Google, Google will take the information off the system. So that means sometimes you don't know what's there. But we've seen situations for managers or CEOs where they're ranting on Facebook saying, we had one not too long ago saying, someone needs to kill President Obama. Well, that didn't get funded. To young MBAs who are tweeting outside a porn shop at 3 in the morning saying, I'm wasted. We see all the time. We haven't seen any sexting yet, but that's going to be coming. The things you don't want to hear, but they're the things that you need to know. Nowadays you can search someone's name and or their phone number, come up with an email address. You find an email address that can lead to Twitter handles or other Facebook accounts, etc. So it's very interesting. When we many times find that a fund manager does not have a profile on Facebook, but his spouse often does. And sometimes the spouse is telling what's going on at home and what's done. So it's really unbelievable what's there. We did one fund manager. We found out he's got a older bride. These are all just things you want to know. Sometimes you do reverse image lookups. It's humorous, but it can be damaging. And that's a true story not too long ago. And the investor had to really think about that. Do you really want to approach a manager and say,
that's interesting.
But there are things you can do with reverse image searches, etc. And so there's so much information, which is actually overwhelming. So we actually partner with a technology company that has machine-learned language to process information. So you can look at all the details of their online presence. But ultimately, it comes down to the human analysis to see what's important or not. So we'll stay tuned to this thing on the State Department, but that's actually amazing.
It's very interesting.
It's something else that the Trump administration came out with, where they're doing the same thing for immigrant visas that covers, I don't know, it's 1 million people. So
Ken, I have some questions here from the audience, and I want to make sure that we get them in before our time's up. And this first question that I'm going to pass on to you is sort of a follow-up on what we were just discussing, I think. And here it is: with all of the information available on the internet, does this impact your business?
Well, that's a good question. The internet is great. Like probably the first thing we do is go to the internet. We Google someone, and all our clients do before they give it to us, before they call us. It's a place to get some information quickly, but the problem is you can't rely on it at all. We've seen false information on it. I guess President Trump would call it fake news. It's the information on the internet is not necessarily double sourced. said before, they have the right to be forgotten. And Google can get you on the first page, as you can pay to get on the first page of Google, they have companies that will put you on the last page. So if there's something negative, they'll put you on the last page. There's something called reputation.com. The newspapers only leave their information up on the internet for a certain period of time. And although there's some criminal records, some civil lawsuits and things like that, they're not uniform. It's not all across the board. It looks like it's a great thorough search, but you really have to know what you're getting, but more importantly, what you're not. Also, what you find on the internet is all accolades, any blemishes. A lot of the critical honesty factors I think that we look at in our typical findings, you don't find them on the internet. We call them LinkedIn lies and Facebook exaggerations. But on the positive side to all this, there's a lot of automated solutions that are helpful, prime brokers or KYC and AML, where they can quickly go through information for low-volume transactions to meet compliance and regulatory standards. The thing is, when you do that, there's also a low cost, but how do they deal with common names? Do they miss certain things? And I think the answer is yes, but those solutions are great. And matter of fact, we take advantage of technology solutions. We've been using them for years, and I just talked about this software we use to help go through social media. It's a company called FAMA, F-A-M-A. It's a new company. We're going to hear it for a long time coming. So there are a lot of things you can do on the internet through automated solutions. It's going to be quite a while before it can serve investors. For investing and critical hires, I don't think it's near what you need. I think the human analysis is still something that you're going to need for a long time.
So here's another question from the audience. They want to circle back to the issue of fraud. What can firms do, money firms, to prevent fraud? That's a fairly open-ended question, but
it is. And one of the things I talk about to groups is what can companies do to prevent fraud. And a lot of this won't relate to asset managers who are more sophisticated than smaller corporations. But I think the biggest thing is to have some type of screening process in place. You need to have a code of conduct. You need to have check and balances. Probably a lot of them do, but there was that fund in Connecticut who didn't. And you also need a lot of cyber controls, everything from encryption, et cetera, because a lot of the frauds are occurring now through spoofing and everything. We just had a hedge fund call us last week and said, we just did a redemption to someone. I've been talking to the guy for the last 4 months. Right at Christmas, he sent me an email and said, hey, I may need to take money out around tax time. So the hedge fund said, okay, and we'll talk. So in the middle of March, the client went back to the fund manager and said, okay, I'm going to need that redemption around April 12th. What do I need to do? I need a letter from you. I need a copy of your driver's license with your picture on it and a few other things. And they sent it. Well, then April came around and said, okay, please here's the wire instructions. Please send the money to this account, et cetera. They said, wire. So the next day when he got a confirmation that, $500,000 went out the door, he goes, what are you talking about? And the hedge fund said, well, I've been having a conversation with you for 3 months. He said, that wasn't me. I didn't send it. I think one of the things this hedge fund didn't do is you're always supposed to call. Spoofing, unfortunately, that's where we live in now.
Yes. So here's another question for you. Can you discuss what happens if and when a firm receives a tip or there's an allegation of fraud, conduct, or sexual harassment? What should they do? What should the firm do with that tip?
Well, the first thing is, you're with your broker to make sure you have fidelity coverage. Fidelity coverage is like employee theft insurance, whether it's the fund manager or whomever. You have to put the firm on notice within days of discovering it. I think the big thing, and we've done things at funds and others, is just because it's an allegation made against someone, whether it's fraud or sexual harassment, You don't take any action, don't fire someone or whatever, because they could turn around, they can own your company because the action may be wrong. So you want to protect the name of the employee. That's the biggest thing. You conduct an inquiry. Generally, you do counsel. I know when we get brought in, we always say, retain us through counsel. And you do it quickly, quietly. You don't want a crowd problem. You don't want customers, investors, anyone to know what's going on. Get facts, segregate evidence, and do it as you can. Many times you find out an employee stole or found an IT guy, and they allow them to resign quietly as long as they sign an NDA, and it's someone else's problem. So that's one of the problems with that. And a tip line is one of the ways that people find things. Do that 39 to 40% of the time is how they do it. But we did something not long ago where a company was about to be acquired. 8 days before they did the closing, the board received, we had different ones. One was said that this was stealing. In this sense, what to do? And I think I mentioned this to you a few months or a while ago when we were speaking. They did fire the CFO, but we went and spoke to the CFO, and we said there was an allegation made against you. And the guy fainted. He goes, "Am I fired?" We said, "We're just going to put you on the sidelines. We'd appreciate your cooperation." And when, I don't know if you have any legal people here, but your options is that one, someone cooperate, you put them on paid suspension. If they refuse to cooperate, this is a question, but oftentimes you can fire not cooperating in a company investigation. But in this instance, he did cooperate. We looked at all his passwords, emails, and everything. The computer policy, we could look at his emails anyway. But didn't think it was him. So what we did do is we looked at the headers on the bottom of the email, and it came back to an employee who works remotely. And we found out that he sent the allegation in, and he was having his own problems with the company. And in fact, the CFO didn't give him a promotion.
But correct me if I'm wrong. When I talked about that, and I think that's a very interesting story. I thought there was one other piece of information, and that is that able to link the email to the employee because of the location the employee was operating from at the time, right? Is that correct? So just to let the audience know about that, I think people in the audience might find that particular fact interesting.
Okay. What we did was we got the original email on Yahoo and a number of the companies. You can get the original email. You can look at the headers under that, and from that you can look at the IP address to see where it came from. In this particular instance, it came from Georgia, which is where this remote worker lived. So
I'm sorry, but isn't the? I thought the IP address was an independent, universal piece of data. But I thought what you were able to do is, so let's say I have a laptop, right, and I'm using my Yahoo account or whatever Gmail account, right, if I have one. Mm-hmm. If I'm sending an email from Atlanta, Georgia, as opposed to Manhattan, you're able to detect that.
Yeah, IP address. You can't do this with Gmail. You can do it with Yahoo. And we were able to show that from Gmail account or from Yahoo account, he was sending it from Alpharetta, Georgia. This anonymous email came from Orlando, Florida, and we found out, we said, we got the email came from the person in Orlando. They said he was at a conference down in Orlando then. So they logged in through the VPN, and it was the same IP address, so they said, okay, we got him. So then it became a legal issue. But that's, with computer forensics, a lot of times you can solve investigations or hopefully
very interesting.
Solve investigations.
Interesting. Ken Springer, you certainly have not disappointed. I want to thank you for sharing your insights and your expertise on this very important topic. Ladies and gentlemen, I would encourage you to reach out to Ken if you have any questions about his presentation, or about the topic of due diligence. This has been, Ken, a very interesting hour. So on behalf of the New York Alternative Investment Roundtable, thanks to Ken Springer, founder and CEO of Corporate Resolutions. So folks, have a good and until next month. Bye-bye now.
Thank you much.